A loud, piercing honk shattered the silence as the car ahead came to an abrupt stop. Something had dashed across the road. Something. Large. My heart racing, I slammed my foot down on the brakes, desperately praying the treacherous, icy road wouldn't betray me with yet another fender bender. The thick veil of the blizzard's haunting symphony made it nearly impossible to discern shapes, but whatever had crossed the highway, it had done so with an unnatural speed and deadly precision. Maybe just a moose, I whispered nervously to myself, trying to dismiss the gnawing unease in my gut. Exhaling shakily, I reclined into my seat and fumbled with the radio volume. Frank Sinatra's "I've Got You Under My Skin" filled the cozy confines of my SUV, and I felt my thundering heartbeat slowly, steadily stabilize. The endless expanse of white stretched as far as my eyes could see, a blank canvas of isolation. Somewhere out there, I knew, stood a forest on either side of the highway. But in these hellish weather conditions, anything beyond 6 feet might as well have been another world entirely. My fingers drummed anxiously against the steering wheel, matching the rhythm of Sinatra's melody as impatience gnawed at me. 5 minutes had crawled by, then 10. Surely there couldn't be this much traffic in the middle of nowhere? The song was fading to its end, yet we remained frozen in place. Behind me, an angry chorus of horns pierced the howling wind. Through the curtain of white, I could make out the ghostly glow of headlights. At least 6 cars behind me, probably the same number ahead. Their dim lights were the only proof I wasn't completely alone in this wasteland of white. A chilling thought crept into my mind, spreading like ice through my veins. Had there been an accident? The howling winds outside slammed against my car with savage fury, killing any foolish notion of stepping out to investigate. For now, I was trapped in this metal cage, waiting. With trembling fingers, I pulled out my phone, seeking refuge in mindless apps. I don't condone texting while driving, but considering we were frozen in place, quite literally, I figured a brief social media session couldn't hurt. Besides, I wasn't going anywhere anytime soon. My eyes drifted to the half-empty bottle of Jack Daniels lying unassumingly on the floorboard beside me. Its amber contents beckoned. But no, not yet. Not now. I'd been visiting extended family for the holidays back in my hometown. The whole affair had ended. Prematurely, for reasons I'd rather not discuss. Truthfully, I was relieved to escape the suffocating cloud of family drama and that nauseating holiday cheer. For privacy's sake, I won't name the town I left behind, nor my intended destination. All you need to know is that I was somewhere in the northwestern United States where the cold bites deep into your bones. Time crawled by with agonizing slowness. The vehicles remained motionless, as if the very ice beneath had claimed them. I watched, helpless, as the car ahead slowly disappeared under nature's relentless assault of white. Its tires were nearly consumed now, and I realized with growing dread that missing today's football game would soon be the least of my concerns. Then, piercing through the white void, came the wail of sirens. My eyes darted to the side view mirror where faint blue lights pulsed through the snowfall's thick curtain. The ambulance howled past at breakneck speed, followed closely by a police cruiser. My stomach twisted. Something was terribly, terribly wrong. I returned to my phone, desperately seeking distraction, but even technology seemed to conspire against me. The signal weakened with each passing minute. Videos buffered endlessly. Apps refused to load, as if the digital world itself was being smothered by the storm. I'm no expert in physics or meteorology, but logic suggested the raging storm could be interfering with my signal. That, combined with my isolation, 40 minutes from the nearest settlement, 3 hours from civilization, meant I was truly I jumped violently, a startled gasp escaping my lips. Through the glass stood a police officer, his burly frame dusted with snow, pink-cheeked from the bitter cold, ice crystals clinging to his thick mustache like frozen tears. Hastily stowing my phone away, I rolled down the window, bracing myself for the Arctic blast and whatever reprimand awaited me. But the officer's attention lay elsewhere. "Good evening, sir," he began, his breath crystallizing in the frigid air. "There's been an incident further up the road. Right now we're trying to—" He paused, frowning. "Could you turn that down?" "Of course, officer. Sorry." I fumbled with the volume, silencing Sinatra's crooning. 2 more figures emerged from the white void behind them, giving chase or following, I couldn't tell. As they drew closer, I caught glimpses of their faces. Dear God, such terror. They looked as if they'd gazed into the very depths of hell itself. The first pair sprinted past my car, not even glancing my way. The others, a woman and a boy, followed, their feet dancing precariously across the treacherous ice, fear driving them forward despite the danger of falling. Then they too vanished into the endless white, leaving me alone with my mounting dread. What could drive people to abandon their vehicles out here in this merciless cold? The driver ahead shifted in his seat. I watched transfixed as his door creaked open and a middle-aged man with a pronounced beer gut emerged, wrapping his puffer jacket tightly around himself. He stared into the distance as if searching for something. My mind raced through possibilities. A gas leak? Toxic spill? Radioactive material? Each explanation seemed more unlikely than the last, yet I desperately clung to logic. Anything to explain away the primal fear gnawing at my bones. The man took several cautious steps forward, positioning himself before his car. Something had caught his attention, drawing him further into the storm's embrace. That's when I saw it. Through the swirling snow approaching from the left side of the road, a massive silhouette bobbed rhythmically as it advanced. Even at this distance, I could tell it towered over the man, nearly twice his height. But he hadn't noticed. God help him, he hadn't noticed. My blood ran cold as I watched the shape move. There was something wrong about its motion. Something predatory. Like a lion stalking its prey through tall grass preparing for the kill. Could it be a moose? No, the proportions were all wrong. The way it moved spoke of intelligence, of purpose. It walked on two legs, for Christ's sake. Polar bears never ventured this far south, and even if they did, they couldn't possibly be this large. Every primitive instinct screamed at me to act, to warn him somehow. Fight or flight surged through my veins, but I forced myself to remain still. I was safe in my SUV, wasn't I? But the man, dear God, the man. As I was saying, he continued, tension evident in his voice, we're evacuating the entire area. Once I've reached the final vehicle behind you and gotten them moving, I need you to follow their lead. Immediately. You want me to drive in reverse? I asked incredulously, my face contorting in disbelief. A hint of dark humor crossed his weathered features. Roads too narrow, unless you fancy testing your luck with these ditches. His smirk died as suddenly as it appeared. Bang! The thunderous report echoed through the storm, impossibly loud despite the howling wind. The officer's hand flew to his holster, his entire body tensing like a coiled spring. He backed away, frantically keying his shoulder-mounted radio. Bang, bang. The sounds were unmistakable, gunshots ripping through the white void ahead. The officer drew his weapon with practiced precision and charged toward the chaos, his form gradually dissolving into the relentless snowfall until nothing. The storm had devoured him whole. Minutes crawled by like hours as I waited, desperately hoping to see his return. Snow began accumulating inside my car, forcing me to roll up the window, sealing myself in my protective bubble. More gunshots joined the chorus, different weapons, different shooters. They were emptying their magazines at something. The sounds of desperate combat filled the air until silence, heavy, suffocating silence. An overwhelming sense of dread settled in my gut like lead. My mind raced with possibilities, each more terrifying than the last. What ungodly horror awaited in that white abyss? My fingers resumed their nervous dance on the steering wheel as my eyes once again found the Jack Daniels bottle. How long had it been since my last drink? Years of dependency screamed at me to reach for it, just one sip to steady my nerves. If I'm careful, who would know? As I leaned toward the passenger side, reaching for that amber comfort, my entire vehicle shuddered violently. Something powerful had slammed into my SUV. Jesus Christ, I jerked upright, abandoning the bottle as my eyes frantically scanned every window, every mirror. Nothing but endless white until a dark silhouette materialized in the blizzard ahead. No, two silhouettes. Running. These weren't officers or paramedics. They were fleeing. Suddenly, the man's scream pierced the winter air, a sound of pure, instinctive terror that seemed to reverberate through my SUV. My eyes darted forward, straining to see what had caused such a reaction. He turned sharply, stumbling toward his car door. So close. But the slick ice betrayed him. He slipped, hitting the ground hard. The large silhouette to his left had vanished into the storm. For a fleeting moment, our eyes met. His expression, frozen in wide-eyed fear, sent a chill through me deeper than the icy air ever could. He clawed at the ground, trying to pull himself toward the safety of his vehicle. A strangled cry tore through the air as something unseen dragged him backward. He struggled, his hands scrabbling at the snow and ice, leaving long marks behind him. For a moment, he grabbed onto the tire of his car, his knuckles white with effort, before he was pulled out of sight, disappearing into the swirling snow. I sat there, frozen, my breath catching in my throat. The scene felt surreal, like a waking nightmare I couldn't escape. Silence descended again, broken only by the steady howl of the wind. My hands shook as I grabbed my phone, frantically trying to call for help. Every shadow, every corner of the blizzard now felt alive, as if something unseen was watching. My fingers fumbled over the phone screen. I checked the doors, locked, and tried to focus on dialing, but the call wouldn't connect. Emergency lines were supposed to work anywhere, weren't they? I slid lower in my seat, gripping the steering wheel tightly. Time seemed to stretch into eternity as I waited, barely daring to breathe. Snowflakes melted against the windshield, streaking down in irregular patterns. The wipers scraped back and forth, a relentless reminder of the world outside. Until, thud. Something heavy hit the windshield, and I flinched. The wipers smeared the glass, creating a dark streak. My heart pounded as I squinted through the distortion. For a moment, I thought I saw a face pressed against the glass, its expression pleading, before the storm swallowed it once more. Recognition hit me like a punch to the gut. The face, frozen in a look of utter terror, stared at me through the cracked glass, barely a foot away. His hair was matted with ice, his skin pale and bruised beneath the layers of snow, and his eyes wide with a fear that seemed to transcend death itself. For a moment, I couldn't comprehend what I was seeing. How was this even possible? How was he still here, so close, when everything outside had been so quiet, so still? But the worst part wasn't just his face. It was the emptiness that followed, the unmistakable feeling that something was wrong. The man's head was perfectly intact, but there was a brutal absence where his body should have been. His torso, legs, gone. A jagged space between the snow-covered ground and the cold, stiff shoulders that should have connected to a torso. There was nothing there, nothing but the snow shifting around the hollow absence like it had never been. My stomach churned as I tried to make sense of it, but my mind couldn't form any explanation. How was he alive, if that's even the right word? How was it possible that someone could be missing so much of their body and still exist in front of me? I snapped my eyes away from the sight, my breath coming in ragged gasps. But as hard as I tried, I couldn't erase the image of that vacant space, the missing piece. My heart pounded harder, my thoughts spiraling out of control. Where was the rest of him? Why wasn't I seeing it? I turned away from the window, my hands trembling as I clutched the steering wheel. The storm outside was relentless, a swirling, blinding mass of snow and wind. The wipers struggled against the glass, unable to keep up with the fast-moving flakes, but something about the silence that enveloped me, the endless white stretching out beyond the windshield, felt wrong. It wasn't just the storm. It was something else, something far darker, deeper than just the weather. I tried to focus. There had to be an explanation, something, anything that made sense. But the more I tried to force my thoughts into coherence, the more the weight of the man's face pressed against me, a chilling reminder that something wasn't right. Something was out there, watching. And that sensation, the gnawing feeling that it wasn't over, that something more was lurking in the storm, refused to let go. I forced myself to breathe slowly, counting each breath, trying to push away the panic that was threatening to overtake me. I had to stay calm. I couldn't afford to lose control now. Not when I didn't understand what was happening. But then I heard it, a low, vibrating hum that seemed to resonate through my entire body. It was coming from the distance, cutting through the storm with a deep, unsettling frequency that sank into my chest. I froze, my blood running cold. It wasn't the wind. It wasn't the usual roar of the blizzard. This sound was alive. The way it vibrated made my teeth ache, sending waves of discomfort through my spine. I cracked the window slightly, my hand shaking as I tried to make sense of the noise. It was deep, low-pitched, and carried an unnatural quality that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand on end. My heart raced, thudding in my chest like a drum. This wasn't just the sound of nature or a storm. This was something else entirely, something that didn't belong here, in this desolate place. The sound grew louder, now a kind of rhythmic rumbling that almost seemed to echo off the snowdrifts and trees. It wasn't an animal's call. It wasn't any sound I'd ever heard before. It wasn't even mechanical, like something artificial. It seemed wrong, somehow. The vibrations pressed against my chest, shaking my ribs. I strained my ears, trying to pinpoint its source. It wasn't coming from any particular direction. It seemed to surround me, filling the air, as if the very storm itself had taken on a life of its own. I glanced out the window, but there was nothing visible except the swirling snow. And then I heard something else, an echo, a deep, hollow hoot that seemed to reverberate through the icy air, the sound curling around the storm like a whisper. The hoot was nothing like any animal I knew. It was too low, too guttural. My pulse quickened, a knot of dread tightening in my stomach. I glanced around, my eyes darting across the snowy landscape. The hoot sounded again, closer this time. Something was out there, something that was making these sounds, and it wasn't alone. My heart raced as I watched the snow swirl around in the distance. The visibility was poor, but I could feel it. The presence out there, lurking just beyond the veil of white. The hooting continued, now accompanied by a low rumble that seemed to shake the very ground beneath me. The storm roared louder, but the sounds of that presence, the hooting, the low vibrations, carried through as if nothing could drown it out. The tension in the air thickened like a storm waiting to break. I was trapped. I scanned the cabin for anything I could use, anything to help me, anything to defend myself. My eyes fell on the liquor bottle sitting in the cup holder. It wasn't much, but it was all I had. My hands were cold and trembling as I grabbed it, unscrewing the cap with a sharp twist, the sound of metal against glass ringing through the cabin. As the wind howled louder outside, I felt a primal need to act, to do something, anything. It felt like the air itself was closing in around me, pushing me toward action. I spotted the Zippo lighter in my pocket and struck it, watching the flame flicker to life. The brief light illuminated the cabin, like casting shadows on the walls. My mind raced, and I quickly mixed the alcohol with something I remembered in the glove compartment, a nearly empty bottle of hand sanitizer, a relic from the pandemic days. The mixture wasn't much, but it might buy me some time. I had no idea if it would actually work, but I couldn't afford to hesitate. I fashioned a crude Molotov cocktail, praying it would work, praying it would stop whatever was out there. My hands were shaking too much to be steady, but I couldn't afford to hesitate. As I prepared to throw the bottle, I glanced out the window. A massive shadow loomed in the distance. It was still far, but I could see the shape of it now, the way it moved through the snow with unnatural grace. It wasn't human. The movement was fluid, too smooth for a man, too deliberate, too otherworldly. My breath hitched and my grip on the bottle tightened. I couldn't stay here any longer. The creatures, whatever they were drawing closer. They had to be. My only chance was to run. I couldn't stay. I couldn't wait for them to reach me. With one last, desperate glance at the window, I slammed my foot on the gas. The tires spun uselessly in the thick snow before finally finding traction, and the car lurched forward. I floored the accelerator, but the snow was thick, and the wheels couldn't grip well enough to get me out of this hellscape. The tires spun, screeching against the ice, but the car barely moved forward, slipping and sliding. I locked eyes with the dark shape outside. Its gaze was sharp, predatory. It was watching me, waiting. My blood ran cold, but there was no turning back. The moment of decision had passed. I slammed the car into reverse, desperate to make some sort of escape, my heart pounding in my chest, my hands slick on the steering wheel. That's when the impact came. The side of the car was struck with a force so violent it sent the SUV airborne. The world tilted as metal screamed and crumpled, my head jerking forward as the airbags deployed and the seatbelt bit into my chest. Time seemed to stretch as I was thrown against my seatbelt, the vehicle tumbling end over end. Everything went dark for a split second as the world spun out of control, but when the car finally came to a halt, I was hanging upside down, my seatbelt the only thing preventing me from crashing into the broken glass. The air was thick with smoke, and the sharp metallic tang of blood, my blood, filling my nostrils. I gasped for air, my heart pounding as the cold seeped in from the shattered windows. My body ached, but the fear was still there, gnawing at my insides. My ribs felt bruised, and there was a deep pain in my side, but I couldn't think about that now. I couldn't afford to. Then came the footsteps. Heavy, deliberate, each one growing closer. The creature outside had arrived. I could hear it moving, the crunch of snow beneath its massive feet, the low rumble of its presence. It was like the world itself held its breath, the storm silencing just for a moment. The footsteps grew louder, and I knew they were coming for me. I didn't have much time. I reached into my jacket and grabbed the liquor bottle I had hastily prepared, the last shred of hope I had. My heart pounded, my pulse roaring in my ears as the footsteps came closer and closer. I braced myself for what was coming, the feeling of helplessness threatening to overwhelm me. Whatever was out there was near, and it wasn't going to stop until it got what it wanted.